She handed her a paper cup. She did not expect anything else. The cup steamed in the cold morning air like a small promise. The city smelled of wet pavement and frying oil, horns softened by a drizzle, and a narrow strip of sunlight cut across a bus stop bench where a toddler had left a crayon drawing. Maria, 33, single mother, worked 2 shifts and slept in a rented room that leaked in heavy rain, and she was losing the rhythm that had once kept her family steady. Across the street, Evelyn, 53, CEO of a small but ambitious company, had completed a board meeting and walked without noticing the sharp edges of her own loneliness. Evelyn saw a woman rocking a child whose jacket was too thin and, without ceremony, stepped forward and tilted her cup, offering it like bridging 2 islands. "You do not have to," the woman began. "I know," Evelyn replied. "I just wanted to help." The child clutched the cup and giggled, the sound bright and sudden, and tucked into the inside pocket of the tiny jacket was a drawing, crumpled and sticky with rain. Evelyn took her business card and wrote a single line on the back: "If you ever need anything, call this number." She had no idea that the drawing would come to chart 5 unexpected paths between a single mom and a CEO. The true story began when someone else noticed the scribble. She carried her life in small containers: a lunchbox with dented corners, a plastic folder with school papers, a tote bag with a hole that let cold air in. The place she returned to at night was not a home in any reassuring sense. It was a 3rd-floor room above a laundromat, with a radiator that clanged at dawn and curtains that never fully closed. The walls were thin enough to hear neighbors cough, and sometimes tap water tasted faintly of metal. Maria had not always been reducing her memories to a shoebox. She had grown up in a town where a backyard apple tree taught her that seasons altered more than weather. Her father taught her to steady a hammer and to count every small expense. She studied for a degree while working nights at a bakery, and for a time the arc was gentle, like a slow sunrise. Then her partner left. Then the company she worked for outsourced her position, and medical bills arrived like uninvited guests. Her daughter Anna, 5, became the center of every plan and every fear. Maria learned to be almost invisible so she could be overwhelmingly present for Anna. She could name every ringtone from the past 3 years, every bus route that cut the commute in half, and the face of the teacher who once said Anna would be all right if given quiet time. That teacher was Rosa, who would later appear in the story to sign permission slips and to volunteer at meetings. At hushed moments, Maria still kept a photograph folded twice in her wallet. A summer afternoon with laughter trapped in color. It was a backstory of small defeats and fierce tenderness, written in receipts and in the way Anna asked about stars before bed. It was a backstory that explained why Maria had wrapped Anna in a too thin jacket that morning, and why a crayon drawing in a pocket felt like a map to something bigger. The drawing itself was simple, urgent, and unmistakable. A house scribbled in purple, a sun that looked like a burst of teeth, stick figures that held hands with bold loops, and a single word in shaky capitals: hope. When Evelyn unfolded the jacket later in a quiet office meeting, the paper smelled faintly of crayons and warm body, like the inside of a classroom at recess. Marcus, her executive assistant, leaned in under the fluorescent lights and traced the lines with a finger as if mapping a coastline. Claire, a volunteer from a community program that partnered with Evelyn's company, suggested they try to find the family. There was something in the drawing that humanized the envelope of corporate concern, a scribble that felt like a key. Marcus looked up. "Who is she?" he asked. Evelyn said, "I do not know, but I will find out." The drawing sat on a glass table and reflected the ceiling lights, and for the first time in months, Evelyn felt herself tethered to a life outside quarterly reports. The pocket had one more thing, a small folded permission slip from Anna's preschool, with Maria's name and a phone number spelled in a hurried hand. It was not a big clue, but it was enough to start a search. The discovery created a strange empathy across class lines, binding a suit and a rental receipt through a child's scrawl. Pause for a moment and think about your own small choices. If you were standing at that bus stop, what would you have done? If a stranger offered a cup of coffee, would you accept or would you walk on? We are asking because this story is built around the quiet decisions we all make every day. If this touched you, tell us in the comments what small gesture once changed your life. Start your comment with "once" and share one detail, one object, one word. Those answers help other people feel less alone, and sometimes they become the beginning of a conversation we keep returning to. We read many of them, and we choose a few to share in future episodes, so your memory matters. Now back to Maria and Evelyn, and to how a tiny drawing unfolded into 5 unexpected ways their lives became entangled. Finding someone in a city is an exercise in patience and resourcefulness. Evelyn directed Marcus to loop through community contacts. He called Claire at the shelter, who in turn called Daniel, a bus driver who had a keen eye for regular faces, and Jamal, a barista who knew most mornings' patrons by name. Priya, who led human resources at Evelyn's company, offered to run a background check within privacy limits, careful to stay humane. Each person named added a thread. Marcus texted Rosa at the preschool, who remembered the handwriting and the fact that the paper had come home in a torn folder. Daniel described a woman with a daughter who boarded the same bus at 6th and Pine, and Jamal recalled giving a leftover sandwich to a woman who smelled faintly of laundry soap and cinnamon. Evelyn sat with the list and felt a pattern, like a constellation forming. The team honed in on a landlord, Mateo, who paid attention to which apartments had quiet comings and goings, and he pointed them toward a 3rd-floor room above a laundromat. Maria's number on the permission slip connected, after a long minute, to a voice that was cautious and tired. Evelyn kept her voice steady. "Hi," she said. "My name is Evelyn. I think we might have your daughter's drawing." There was a pause, long enough to hear the hum of a dryer in the background. "Who is this?" Maria asked. "Someone who cares," Evelyn said. Marcus, Claire, Priya, Daniel, Jamal, Rosa, and Mateo had each done a small thing. Together, they became a net. The first meeting at the laundromat was deliberate and awkward, the kind of human moment that unspools slowly so everyone has time to breathe. Maria clutched Anna's hand and smelled of warm detergent and the faint sweetness of stewed fruit from a lunchbox. Evelyn arrived in a suit that had a faint perfume, soft and professional, and held a small tote with a thermos of tea. They spoke in measured sentences, exchanging cautious courtesies and probing questions like gardeners testing soil. "You looked after her drawing," Maria said. Evelyn answered, "We did. I found it, and it pulled at me." "How," Maria asked, "could someone like you do something like this?" Evelyn said, "I do not do it alone," and she named names in quick, respectful succession: Marcus, Claire, Priya, Daniel. That list of names became a lifeline rather than an accusation. Then Evelyn did something unexpected, in tone and in content. She offered not charity, but involvement. Her company needed someone with Maria's attention to detail to lead a small pilot project designing family-friendly schedules for employees at a new community center. "You can do this work from mornings," Evelyn said. "We will pay and we will train you." Maria's first reply was disbelief. "I cannot," she said. "I have never had that kind of work." Evelyn said, "You have been doing the most important work for years. Why not give that credit a title?" Maria hesitated, scanning her own hands, the calluses barely visible, the dents in her knuckles. Marcus interjected with practical questions. "Do you have reliable transportation, Maria?" Maria said, "Sometimes." Priya offered to arrange childcare stipends. Jamal promised to keep Anna in the cafe for supervised play if she needed a safe corner. That exchange had 7 turns in all, each one loosening a knot. The offer felt improbable because it did not fit the usual narrative of hands extended and then pulled back. It was an offer that asked for skill and promised dignity. Acceptance unfolded slowly, like a door opening with a long, reluctant creak, then widening. Maria took the position as a trial, not because she believed completely, but because Anna had pointed to the drawing and said, "Mama, that was us." Her first week at the community center was sensory in a kind of radical way. The smell of new paint and lemon cleaner mingled with the soft nylon of activity mats. The room echoed with the thud of a ball and the low hum of people making tea. Maria learned to log volunteer hours, to lead a small table where parents talked about laundry cycles and about finding time to read, and to match needs to services in a spreadsheet that smelled faintly of ink and coffee. Her hands, once practiced in kneading dough and counting change, found new muscles for typing and for shaking hands during welcome meetings. The center's staff included Rosa, the preschool teacher, Jamal, the coffee shop owner, Claire, the shelter coordinator, Daniel, the bus driver who volunteered on weekends, and Priya, who ran the HR workshops. Each morning, small rituals arrived. Marcus checked in by text with a single emoji that meant everything was okay. Evelyn attended the first family planning meeting and quietly listened as parents spoke of small triumphs. A child who had eaten breakfast, a form completed in full. One morning after a workshop, Maria found a folder on her desk with a typed note that simply read, "Thank you for showing us what community looks like," and a photocopy of Anna's drawing, curated and framed by the center. The symbolism was not lost on anyone. It was another small act of care that rippled outward. As Maria settled into the work, 5 distinct ways that she and Evelyn connected became visible, each a thread that changed not only the 2 women, but the community around them. The first way was through direct material aid, simple acts that met immediate needs: a cup of tea, a winter scarf, a childcare stipend. The second way was through recognition, naming a set of skills that Maria had always used as legitimate professional experience. The third way was infrastructure building, the community center itself, where schedules, resources, and a dedicated staff turned sporadic charity into sustained support. The fourth way was narrative change, the rewriting of expectations about who was qualified to lead and who deserved a seat at the table. The fifth way was relational, the creation of small personal rituals and promises that held them accountable to each other. Each connection layered on the others, and the cumulative effect was greater than any single gesture. Workshops began to change the tone of the neighborhood. Parents reported sleeping better. Enrollment at the preschool rose. Marcus arranged a mentorship program with other employees who had once been overlooked. Claire organized a council with local shelters and landlords, including Mateo, to coordinate housing applications. Priya created a flexible payroll pilot so employees could swap shifts without losing pay, and the pilot was informed by Maria's real-time notes. Jamal donated pastries for Saturday family mornings. Daniel rerouted an early bus to drop families closer to the center. Each of these people, Marcus, Claire, Rosa, Jamal, Priya, Daniel, and Mateo, performed a named action that moved the needle. Testimonials came in like small, honest letters. Rosa said that Anna began to draw houses with 2 windows again. Daniel said that drivers talked about the center at break time. A neighbor named Omar, who had once complained about noise, brought in a box of crayons for the kids, and later apologized for not seeing the struggle earlier. These were not grand gestures. They were practices that accumulated dignity. Tension did not vanish. There were 3 moments that put the fragile progress to the test. The first came when funding for the pilot program wavered. The city grant that was expected arrived with restrictions and a delayed schedule, and the center faced the prospect of cutting childcare stipends. Maria felt her stomach knot, the old fear returning as if it never left. In that week, the smell of printer ink and late-night coffee became almost too sharp, and a meeting room hummed with worried voices. Evelyn took responsibility, staying late to draft alternative proposals and to call potential donors. She sat with Marcus and Priya and rewrote budgets until dawn. In an exchange that lasted across several hours, Evelyn said, "This is not negotiable," and the team replied with plans and numbers and names. The second tense moment came when a background check flagged a past eviction from Maria's record. It was an old paperwork error that would have disqualified her from certain benefits. Priya and Claire combed through documents, reached out to legal aid, and Rosa provided a character reference that read like a small chapel of support. The third moment was private and raw. One evening, Anna fell ill, and Maria had to miss an essential planning session. The fear of losing her position loomed. Jamal watched her face and offered to cover with a prepared meal and to sit with Anna for an hour. Evelyn, who had been learning to trust rather than to dictate, called and said, "Take your time," and then arranged for a remote check-in so Maria could keep her role without losing her child in the process. Each tense episode was stretched over paragraphs of careful action, of problem-solving, of small sensory moments. The clink of a kettle, the rustle of paper, the faint smell of baby lotion at a night clinic. These moments tested the durability of their arrangements and, in passing, strengthened them. The pilot matured into a model that began to influence Evelyn's company culture and the neighborhood's sense of possibility. Within 1 month, the center reported attendance up by 20%, and a small fund to cover emergencies had been seeded through employee donations organized by Marcus and Priya. At 3 months, the flexible payroll pilot had reduced absenteeism among working parents by nearly 40%, and a local landlord association, led by Matteo, agreed to reserve a few units at below-market rates for qualified families. At 6 months, the most tangible outcomes were obvious. Maria accepted a permanent role as family liaison. Anna enrolled full-time in preschool with scholarships secured by Claire and Rosa, and a small cohort of other parents entered a training program modeled after Maria's onboarding. Evelyn's company published a short case study about the center that included testimonials and concrete metrics, and the story drew attention from other small businesses that wanted to replicate the model. The center itself evolved, adding a community garden that produced vegetables for a weekend meal program, and the smell of basil and soil became a new sensory marker for healing. People who once moved through the block without notice now stopped to say hello. Jamal hosted monthly coffee gatherings where neighbors swapped recipes and childcare tips. Marcus set up a mentorship circle, linking employees with community members for skill sharing. Rosa started an after-school art club where children made illustrated permission slips and displayed them proudly. A volunteer named Elena organized a library drive that filled a shelf with books for toddlers. Data and humanity merged, with spreadsheets showing improved outcomes and with small human stories anchoring those numbers. Maria, who had once measured triumph in bills paid on time, now measured it in nights when Anna slept through and in the way other parents used her advice as a map. Evelyn learned to listen and to let decisions be shaped by people like Maria. The 5 ways they connected had ripple effects that reached beyond the center stores. The months that followed were not a fairy tale, but a sequence of negotiated realities, each with its own texture. At 1 month, Maria had a routine. Wake with Anna, walk past the laundromat that had been her landmark, drop Anna at preschool, log in for morning meetings, and run afternoon family workshops. She carried a laminated schedule that smelled faintly of Play-Doh and lemon cleaner. She kept Anna's drawings folded in her wallet and sometimes found herself staring at hope written in crooked capitals as if the word absorbed meaning daily. At 3 months, the neighborhood had a small market evening where families sold home-baked goods and crafts, and Maria negotiated with vendors to create a rotating childcare corner. She had started to save a small amount each week. At 6 months, a modest ceremony marked the opening of a refurbished wing at the community center. Evelyn spoke briefly, not as a benefactor, but as a partner. And Marcus presented a framed reproduction of Anna's drawing to be hung in the lobby. Rosa read a short note about how community begins in acts that others call ordinary. There were names attached to each plaque and each promise, from Claire, who kept open lines with shelters, to Jamal, who donated coffee, to Daniel, who drove an extra route for families attending evening classes. The final months produced reconciliations, too. Maria received a call from her estranged sister, who had seen the case study online, and they spoke for the first time in years. Anna, who had once drawn suns with jagged edges, began to draw little open doors. The epilogue of these months was not a neat ledger, but a living document of small improvements and persistent hope. In conclusion, the picture that remained was simple and stubborn. A paper cup offered in a cold morning, a child's crayon drawing found in a pocket, a phone number written carelessly on the back of a business card, and the chain of 5 unexpected ways that followed. What began as a single act of kindness unfolded into recognition, capacity building, infrastructure, narrative change, and deepening relationships. The result was a neighborhood that hummed differently, a company that regraded its values to include dignity as a metric, and a mother who reclaimed a name beyond her struggles. Today, Maria and Anna lived in a small apartment close to the center, with a mailbox that had their name and a doorman who greeted Anna with a wave. The community garden yielded tomatoes that tasted like summer and like work done together. Evelyn continued to run her company, but she also attended monthly family nights where she stood at the back listening and learning, sometimes bringing pastries that Jamal had provided. She had learned to trust the wisdom that lived in everyday experience and to let that wisdom shape policy. If this story leaves one image, let it be Anna's drawing framed in the lobby. The lines still imperfect, hope written in capital letters, visible to everyone who walked in. If you feel moved, consider a small act in your own life, something immediate and human, a cup of tea, an hour of listening, a note that says, "I see you." Those acts add up. If you were touched by this episode, subscribe to hear more stories that trace how ordinary choices change lives. Share this one with someone who needs to remember that small gestures matter. Sometimes a single drawing is all it takes to redraw the map of a community.